On June 9, 1944, 3 days after D-Day, a Spanish chicken farmer sitting in a modest house in North London sent a telegram that would change the course of World War II. The message traveled from his radio set to Madrid, then to Berlin, and finally to Adolf Hitler's desk. It convinced the Führer to issue an order turning around panzer divisions that were already moving toward Normandy. With that single transmission, this unassuming 32-year-old man who had failed at nearly every venture in his life saved thousands of Allied lives and secured the success of history's largest amphibious invasion. His name was Juan Pujol Garcia, but the world would come to know him by his codename, Garbo. And here's the twist that makes his story almost impossible to believe. When he started his espionage career, he had never been to England, didn't speak English, and both the British and Germans had initially rejected him as a spy. Yet he would become so convincing in his deception that he remains the only person in history to receive military honors from both sides of the war, the Nazi Iron Cross and the British MBE. This is the story of the greatest double agent who ever lived. A man whose imagination became a weapon more powerful than tanks or bombers, and whose elaborate fiction kept Hitler's armies waiting for an invasion that would never come.
Juan Pujol Garcia was born in Barcelona on February 14, 1912, to a family of moderate means and liberal political beliefs. By all accounts, he was spectacularly ordinary and spectacularly unsuccessful at nearly everything he attempted. He failed as a student, failed as a businessman, and when he tried to become a cinema magnate, that venture collapsed too. When the Spanish Civil War erupted in 1936, Pujol found himself caught between two totalitarian forces he equally despised, the fascists under Franco and the communists. He reluctantly fought in that brutal conflict, managing to serve on both sides without, as he claimed, ever firing a single bullet for either. He emerged from the Spanish Civil War with a deep loathing for totalitarianism in general and Nazism in particular. When World War II began in September 1939 and he watched Hitler's armies conquer Europe while Britain stood alone, something crystallized in his mind. He became convinced that he should make a contribution, as he put it, to the good of humanity. His admiration for Britain, the last democracy standing against the Axis powers, gave him a mission. He would become a spy. There was just one problem. He had absolutely no qualifications, no training, and no connections. He was a hotel manager in Madrid with a wife and young child, living in a country that sympathized with the Nazis. But Juan Pujol had one asset that would prove more valuable than any formal training: an imagination so vivid, so detailed, and so convincing that it could create entire worlds out of nothing.
In January 1941, Pujol approached the British authorities in Madrid 3 separate times, offering to spy for them against Germany. Each time, he was turned away. The British had no reason to trust him. He was a Spanish national with no intelligence background, no network, no credentials. To the harried intelligence officers at the British Embassy, he was just another walk-in with delusions of espionage grandeur. They repeatedly rebuffed him. Most people would have given up. Pujol, however, had a different idea. If the British wouldn't take him as a regular agent, perhaps they would take him as a double agent. But first, he would need to establish credentials. He would need to become a German spy. In early 1941, Pujol approached the German Abwehr intelligence service in Madrid. He convinced them he worked for the Spanish embassy, showing them a fake diplomatic passport he had fabricated. He presented himself as a fanatical pro-Nazi, willing to risk everything for the Führer's new world order. The Germans, always eager for intelligence from Britain, took the bait. Agent Friedrich Knappe-Ratti gave Pujol basic spy training, invisible ink, a code book, and £600. His mission: travel to London, recruit a network of sub-agents, and report on British military preparations. There was just one problem with this plan: Pujol's plan, not the Germans. He had no intention of actually going to London.
Instead of boarding a ship to England, Pujol settled in Lisbon, Portugal. From there, armed with a tourist map of London, information from the public library, a copy of a travel guide, and shipping schedules, he began to create the illusion that he was building a spy network in England. It was an audacious gamble. He had never set foot in Britain, didn't speak English, and had no real intelligence to provide. What he did have was access to reference books, newspapers, advertisements, and an imagination that could transform mundane facts into compelling espionage reports. He gathered factoids from encyclopedias and even from advertisements and placards he saw on the street. He studied British culture, geography, and military structures from books. Then he began inventing agents, completely fictional people with detailed backstories, personalities, and reporting patterns. There was Agent J1, supposedly a Portuguese man, Agent J2, a Swiss businessman, Agent J3, a Venezuelan. He created a waiter from Gibraltar named Fred, who supposedly worked in the Chislehurst caves. Each had their own writing style, their own areas of expertise, their own quirks. His reports were verbose, detailed, and filled with just enough accurate information, gleaned from newspapers and reference materials, to seem credible. He posed as a fanatical Nazi ready to risk his life for Hitler, creating a rich vein of fantasy that provided as much confusing bulk as possible for the Germans to process. The Germans, amazed at the speed with which their new agent had established such an extensive network, began to rely on his reports. Of course, Pujol made mistakes. He once reported that in Glasgow, Scotland, he found men who would do anything for a liter of wine, apparently unaware that Scots preferred whiskey. But the Germans, convinced they had found a goldmine of intelligence, overlooked these occasional oddities.
By late 1941, British intelligence was noticing something strange. They were intercepting German communications that referenced reports from a highly placed agent in Britain, except they knew for certain no such agent existed. MI5 had been systematically rounding up German spies in Britain with remarkable success. Who was this phantom agent sending reports about convoys, troop movements, and military installations? The breakthrough came when the Germans expended considerable resources attempting to hunt down a fictitious convoy that Pujol had reported. The British realized someone was feeding the Germans false information and doing it freelance. They had to find this person. In early 1942, Pujol approached MI6 once again, this time with proof of his German connections. Following interviews by Desmond Bristow of Section V, MI6 Iberian Section, Pujol was finally accepted. In April 1942, the Pujol family, Juan, his wife Araceli, and their young son were smuggled to Britain and settled in a modest house at 35 Crespigny Road in the Hendon neighborhood of North London. MI5 officer Cyril Mills initially suggested Pujol's codename should be changed to befit the best actor in the world, and Pujol became Garbo, after the enigmatic actress Greta Garbo. He was paired with Tomás Harris, a Spanish-speaking MI5 officer who would become his handler and creative partner. Together, they would spend the next 3 years crafting what may be the most elaborate and successful deception operation in military history.
Pujol and Harris wrote 315 letters, averaging 2,000 words each, addressed to a post office box in Lisbon, supplied by the Germans. Later, they would add radio communications. His fictitious spy network was so efficient and verbose that his German handlers were overwhelmed and, according to the official history of British intelligence in World War II, made no further attempts to recruit any additional spies in the UK. The information they supplied was a carefully calibrated mixture: complete fiction, genuine information of little military value, and valuable military intelligence artificially delayed so it would arrive too late to be useful. Eventually, the Germans were funding a network of 27 agents, all entirely fictitious. Garbo didn't just invent agents, he gave them lives. Some got sick and couldn't report for weeks. Some died, and Pujol even planted fake obituaries in British newspapers. The Germans were so deceived they sent condolences to the widows of these non-existent informants. Others developed drinking problems, had affairs, or demanded more money. Each fictional character was fully realized, with personality quirks and realistic problems that made the network seem utterly genuine.
In November 1942, just before the Operation Torch landings in North Africa, Garbo's agent on the River Clyde reported that a convoy of troop ships and warships had left port, painted in Mediterranean camouflage. This was genuine intelligence. The Allies wanted to test Garbo's credibility with the Germans. The letter was sent by airmail and postmarked before the landings, but was deliberately delayed by British intelligence to arrive too late to be useful. Pujol received a reply from his German handlers. "We are sorry they arrived too late, but your last reports were magnificent." The Germans' trust in Garbo was now unshakable. He had proven he had access to genuine, high-level intelligence. The fact that it arrived too late wasn't his fault. It was the limitations of the courier system. MI5 had successfully established Garbo as the Germans' most valuable intelligence asset in Britain. In 1943, responding to German requests for speedier communication, Pujol and Harris created a fictitious radio operator. From August 1943, radio became the preferred method of communication. In January 1944, the Germans told Pujol that they believed the Allies were preparing for a large-scale invasion of Europe and that they looked to him to keep them informed of developments. They were right to be worried. Operation Overlord, the invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe, was indeed being planned. But the Germans didn't know where or when it would come. This set the stage for Garbo's greatest performance. Pujol would play a leading role in Operation Fortitude, the massive deception campaign designed to mislead the Germans about the timing, location, and scale of the Normandy invasion. The plan was breathtakingly ambitious. The Allies created an entirely fictitious army, the first United States Army Group, FUSAG, supposedly stationed in southeast England under the command of General George S. Patton. The deception was supported by inflatable tanks, dummy aircraft, fake buildings, and vehicles driving around transmitting bogus radio chatter. The goal? Convince the Germans that the main invasion would strike at Pas-de-Calais, the shortest route across the English Channel, while Normandy would be merely a diversion. Between January 1944 and D-Day on June 6th, Pujol sent over 500 radio messages to his German handlers, sometimes more than 20 messages per day. His fictional network of 27 agents reported troop movements, equipment transfers, and training exercises, all carefully choreographed to paint a picture of an army massing in southeast England, poised to strike at Calais.
June 6, 1944. In the pre-dawn darkness, thousands of Allied ships crossed the English Channel toward the beaches of Normandy. The largest amphibious invasion in history was underway. But in Berlin, the German High Command hesitated. Was this the real invasion, or was it the diversion that Garbo had warned them about? On June 9th, 3 days after the landings, Garbo sent his most important message. He informed German intelligence that he and his network had identified 75 divisions stationed in the United Kingdom. In reality, only 50 existed. He reported that the 1st U.S. Army Group, Patton's massive fictional force, had not yet participated in the invasion. The message was clear. Normandy was a feint. The real invasion, the massive blow, was still coming at Pas-de-Calais. Garbo's message pointed out that units from Fusag had not participated in the invasion, and therefore the first landing should be considered a diversion. Those panzer divisions were actually on the road toward Normandy, and Hitler sent an order turning them around. This was the pivotal moment. German armored divisions that could have smashed the vulnerable beachhead were held back, waiting for an invasion that would never come. A German message to Madrid 2 days later said, "All reports received in the last week from Arabelle, Garbo's German codename, have been confirmed without exception and are to be described as especially valuable." A post-war examination of German records found that during Operation Fortitude, no fewer than 62 of Pujol's reports were included in OKW, German High Command intelligence summaries. The Germans accepted Garbo's reports so completely that they kept 2 armored divisions and 19 infantry divisions in the Pas-de-Calais region waiting for the real invasion through July and August 1944, long after it became obvious to almost everyone else that Normandy was the main Allied effort.
On July 29, 1944, Pujol received a radio message informing him that the Führer himself had awarded him the Iron Cross for his extraordinary services to Germany. This award was typically reserved for soldiers who fought at the front and required Hitler's personal approval. In a delicious twist of irony, Pujol and Harris sent back a humble message expressing that he was unworthy of such an honor. After the war ended, Pujol was awarded the MBE, Member of the Order of the British Empire, by King George VI. He remains the only person in history to be decorated by both sides in World War II, one side for lying to them, the other for lying so magnificently well. But Pujol's story wasn't over. After World War II, fearing reprisals from surviving Nazis, Pujol, with MI5's help, faked his own death from malaria in 1949 and moved to Angola. He then relocated to Venezuela, where he lived in anonymity, running a bookstore and gift shop called La Casa del Regalo. He divorced his first wife, Araceli, and remarried, having 3 more children in addition to the 3 from his first marriage. Pujol kept his secret until 1984, when Nigel West tracked him down in Venezuela, theorizing he hadn't really died. When West found him, Pujol came out of hiding. He reconnected with his ex-wife, who had always suspected he was alive, and his very upset children, who had not. On the 40th anniversary of D-Day in 1984, Pujol traveled to Omaha Beach in Normandy, where he met veterans of the conflict who queued up to thank him. But when he visited the graves of those killed in the landings, he wept and said, "I didn't do enough." Juan Pujol Garcia died from a stroke in Caracas, Venezuela on October 10, 1988, at the age of 76. In 1985, he had been officially recognized for his achievements at Buckingham Palace, finally receiving public acknowledgement for saving thousands of lives through an act of imagination.
The story of Juan Pujol Garcia, Agent Garbo, stands as one of the most remarkable achievements in intelligence history. A man who failed at almost everything he tried found the one thing he could do better than anyone: create believable fictions.
His network of 27 imaginary agents, his hundreds of thousands of words of fake intelligence, his ability to think like his enemy and give them exactly what they wanted to believe, all of it combined to create a strategic advantage that helped turn the tide of World War II. As author Stefan Talty notes, the Germans felt that no one could fake this much information and this many different characters. They also realized that if they doubted Garbo or cut him off, they wouldn't just lose one agent, they would lose an entire network. Garbo's deception saved countless lives. Every hour that German armored divisions waited at Pas-de-Calais was an hour that allowed Allied forces to strengthen their grip on the Normandy beaches. Every unit held in reserve because of Garbo's fictional Fusag was a unit that couldn't counterattack the vulnerable beachhead. The success of D-Day, and by extension the liberation of Western Europe, owed an incalculable debt to a former chicken farmer who had never fired a shot, but whose imagination proved to be one of the war's most powerful weapons. In the end, Juan Pujol Garcia achieved what he set out to do in 1941. He made his contribution to the good of humanity. He did it not with violence, but with creativity, not with weapons, but with words. He proved that sometimes the most powerful force in warfare isn't firepower or manpower. It's the ability to make your enemy believe a story that isn't true. And no one in history has ever told a more consequential lie.